Welcome back to World History. Today we're going to learn about Chapter 3. This is a brand new unit, Unit 2. So if you did good in the last unit, keep up the good work. And if you struggled in the last unit, here's a chance to turn it around and do your best. So let's get started. First thing we need to learn is, so write some of this down, we're going to have some civilizations. So that's why it says rise of civilizations. Before we had prehistoric, and we were moving into Paleolithic and Neolithic people. Now that they have farming and that they can live as a group, they're going to start forming civilizations. This is all of the what we talked about with regards to the division of labor, okay? You need to understand these rivers. They will flood and they will bring silt. Rivers good. They will also flood and take away, wash away everything you just built. Rivers bad. We'll talk about that, okay? So know what agriculture is. You have, what's irrigation? Do you know that? Okay, that's an easy one. If you don't, we'll learn it in just a second, okay? Understand surplus, the division of labor. Hey, wait a second, didn't we learn that a little bit last time? Yeah, but you get to learn it again, and if you already learned it, you'll be fine. But this is important, okay? This is the foundational building blocks of civilization, okay? We'll talk Sumer and Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is an epic poem. It's one of the earliest epics, earliest stories ever. And then we'll talk about the Akkadian Empire and everybody's favorite, Sargon.
Excellent.
I only say that because my first year teaching here, everybody they loved Sargon, and there you go. All right, so let's get going. Let's start with some geography. Before I show you where these places are, make sure you have this stuff written down. Geography is on every test from here on out, and it's easy points. There's no, either you know where it is or you don't, so just learn where it is and you'll be fine, all right? You need to know two rivers for this chapter, the Tigris and the Euphrates River. You need to know where the Mediterranean Sea is, and you need to know modern-day countries of Iran, Iraq, and Syria. So make sure you write this down, and now let's learn where those things are. Okay, so here's a map. I'll put a little arrow up here. Let's see. Hold on. Look at this technology. There, they're all right there. Did that work? I'm not sure it'll work. It might get covered up by the slide. I don't know. Anyhow, okay, so you've got the Middle East, and right there you can see, and I'll have an arrow pointing it to it. Okay, I like to think top Tigris. Does that help you? Top Tigris, and then there's the Tigris and Euphrates. They both flow right there into the Persian Gulf, okay? There's the Mediterranean Sea. You can see a little bit of it. Look of it over on this world map. There's the Mediterranean Sea. Classes in the past have said that it looks like a seahorse. Do you see the seahorse? I don't see it. But if you see it, great. So the seahorse, Mediterranean Sea. Now, let's look at the countries. The big one there, that's Iran, okay? Next to it is Iraq, and then over there is Syria. Those are the three modern-day countries you need to know for this chapter. So let's go over it again. Two rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, they're right there and right there. Three countries, Iran, Iraq, Syria, don't mix up Iran and Iran, and then the Mediterranean Sea. Sound good? All right, great. So now we can look at this place. It's called the Fertile Crescent or Mesopotamia. They're all synonymous. And these are going to be some of the first civilizations ever in human history. The city of Ur, the city of Urk, they're down here by the Persian Gulf. Again, if you're going to have civilization, it's always going to be by water, or almost always. You're going to need water. And you can see this Fertile Crescent, okay? And that's where you're going to be able to have the most food, the best crops, something like that. Make sure you understand how surplus of food contributes to the division of labor. Here's a map showing all of the original or some of the earliest civilizations, and you can see right there's Mesopotamia. That's what we're learning about now. The next time when we learn about, in chapter 4, we'll learn about Egypt, and that'll be the next one. Okay, makes sense. So irrigation is the process of moving water and supplying plants with water, okay? Here, I'll read the slide. Irrigation is the method in which water is supplied to plants for agriculture. Irrigation makes farming in an arid region possible. Look, just know that one of the earliest, I don't know if I want to call it technologies, but one of the earliest ways that physical geography gets altered by humans is we're going to dig ditches and we're going to move water and we're going to use the water to plant the crops. That's one of the earliest. We talked about that cycle, physical geography, human geography. That's one of the first things that humans do. Alter the water, get the crops. You've seen it before. We loved it. Let's watch it again. If you know this, you can fast forward a little bit, but if you need a review, this is it. Enjoy.
Humans as we know them have been walking around for about 200,000 years. Yet despite having bigger brains and finer hands, we continue to behave as our predecessors had. This was a nomadic lifestyle, following herds, gathering wild plants and fruits along the way. Then about 10,000 years ago, we came to a divide. On this side, we had the nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle we'd always known. On the far side, we had settled agriculture. The differences between these two are simple, but, as we shall see, they have lasting implications. As a nomad, you must find your food. Since you must find your food, you must move before your food sources are depleted or before your food wanders off. Since you must be able to move, you can only store as much food as you can carry. Storage is particularly difficult because as a nomad, you eat mostly meat, which has a high nutritional value but is difficult to preserve and store. Now let's look at the other side of the divide. As a farmer, you make your own food. In fact, you can produce more food than you can eat. This is called a surplus. Since growing crops takes time, you must stay put to care for your plants. Since you're not going anywhere anyway, you have the option of storing lots of food. And storage is made easy because as a farmer, you eat very little meat, but a lot of grains, which have a low nutritional value, but are very easy to preserve and store. So when droughts hit, and the hunting is bad, nomads must move along or starve to death, while farmers can survive off the surpluses they stored. Yet there are other effects of agriculture besides mere survival. The most obvious is that when you have more food, you can make more people. And because one farmer can feed several people, this makes possible the division of labor. Now, instead of every man being a hunter-gatherer, concerned only with getting food for himself, now one can be a baker, another a carpenter, another a soldier. With specialization come new technologies. And these technologies allow us to produce even greater surpluses in larger populations. The greater the surplus one farmer can produce, the more labor can be divided, allowing for more improvements in technologies, which allow for still greater surpluses and even larger populations. This is what is called a positive feedback loop. We can see the results clearly. These days, a single farmer, with the aid of technology, can feed thousands. With all these surpluses, the world's population has passed 7 billion. Now, as well as carpenters and bakers, we have firemen, doctors, and astronauts. It should be...
Welcome back. So look, you settled in this nice fertile crescent. That makes sense. Okay? Here we go. Uh-oh, it's back.
Something strange in your neighborhood. Who you gonna call?
Okay, physical geography, human geography. Here's what's going to happen with these two rivers. First off, what are the rivers called? That's right, Tigris and Euphrates. You got it. Okay, Tigris, Euphrates. Sometimes they're going to flood, and they're going to bring in silt, which is a special type of dirt that the plants love, and the plants grow, and everything's awesome, and we love the Tigris and the Euphrates. Sometimes flood good, but sometimes the flood comes in, washes away the crops, maybe your house, takes everything out to sea, all that you worked for, maybe even kills some people. Sorry about that. And flood is bad. Flood bad. Okay? This dichotomy is going to influence their whole life. So when we look at Mesopotamia, we're going to be talking about different peoples, okay? The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, different people will live in this region. The other thing is they're going to have a religion called Zoroastrianism, which has two extremes, a good and a bad. Their whole life is a little bit about suffering. Their whole life is kind of a dichotomy. And I want you to compare and contrast that with Egypt in a minute, where the Nile is very ritual, always brings in the silt. It's usually really good. Life is good. And so they have a different view of the afterlife. So how do these rivers affect these people? It affects them really deeply. So that's sort of what we're going to be talking about. Okay? Talk about the Sumerians, Sumer. They have cities of 10,000 to 100,000 people. Okay? The big cities that you can notice are Ur and Uruk. They're down there. Awesome. Gilgamesh. Okay? Okay, so Uruk is a city-state. Should talk about city-state real quick. A city-state is usually like a city with walls around it. And in essence, it's its own kind of country, okay? It's a little mini country. It's a city that has its own rules and its own leaders, its own military, etc. And sometimes you can have multiple city-states within a region. An example of that would be like Greece. You had Athens and Sparta. Here you'll have Uruk, Ur, and a bunch of others. But they're all part of the Sumerian culture, Sumerian Empire. The Akkadians are the real first empire. But anyhow, so Gilgamesh is going to become this story 700 years later, and it's embellished and it's magical, and it's considered one of the first, if not the first, epic. And a lot of our superhero motifs are drawn upon from these ancient stories. So real quick, here's something to help you memorize stuff. Every chapter or every unit will have, you need to know the geography. Then you're going to need to know an epic poem. Okay, so later it'll be Iliad, Odyssey. In India, it's the Ramayana. Everybody has sort of a story. So just make sure you know, in Mesopotamia, the story, okay, it's Gilgamesh. I know I'm babbling a little bit. Let's get going. Watch this cartoon on Gilgamesh.
There's another really famous story. It's one of my favorites. It's a very long story called an epic. It's about a king named Gilgamesh. He's a hero who has a lot of adventures, along with his best friend, whose name is Enkidu. Enkidu is a wild man who runs with the animals. But then he meets Gilgamesh, and they really hit it off. One day they were looking for adventure, so they decided to travel west to the mountains, high up into the cedar forest, to bring cedar wood back to the city. Cedar trees are tall and straight, and the wood lasts a long time. It's perfect for building a palace. But there was another reason for going to the cedar forest. A demon lived there. He was a huge, angry demon named Huwawa. Gilgamesh and Enkidu thought they were strong enough to defeat him in battle, and they wanted to try. So the two friends set out. They moved so fast, a trip that should have taken 6 months, they made in just 2 weeks. Leaving the river valley, they climbed higher and higher. The air became crisp and cool, and they could hear the sounds of rushing streams and the wind blowing in the trees. Soon they reached the place where the cedar trees grew tallest and straightest. They brought out their axes to start cutting them down. Gilgamesh had just touched the first tree with his axe when they heard an awful roar. It was Huwawa! The demon took a giant leap toward them. "Why are you cutting my trees?" he said. "Leave now or you'll be sorry." His face was horrible and twisted with anger. Well, I would have left right then, but Gilgamesh and Enkidu turned to face the demon. They called on the sun god to protect them. The sun god liked Gilgamesh, so he sent the 13 great winds to wrap themselves around Huwawa and bring him to the ground. The demon promised Gilgamesh all the cedar wood he could carry if only he would set him free. But Enkidu didn't believe a word. "Don't let him go," he warned Gilgamesh. So with one swift stroke, Gilgamesh killed the demon. Then they were free to choose the finest cedar trees. They cut them into logs, lashed the logs together into a raft, and floated back down the Euphrates River to the city. After that, Gilgamesh was even more famous. Tales of his deeds even reached the ears of the gods. The goddess Inanna heard about Gilgamesh. She was the goddess of love, and she fell in love with him. But Gilgamesh brushed her off and was very rude. Well, Inanna was also the goddess of war, and now she was furious. She sent the giant bull of heaven to trample the city. As the bull charged toward them, Enkidu caught it by the horns, and Gilgamesh struck the beast with his sword and killed it. The grateful people threw a huge feast to celebrate, but the gods were not pleased. Soon afterward, Enkidu became very sick and died. Gilgamesh was really upset. He started to search for ways to become immortal so he'd never have to die himself. He decided to find Ziusudra, the only man to survive the Great Flood. Surely he knew the secret of eternal life. Gilgamesh wandered into the wild lands and eventually came to a door leading into a mountain. It was the entrance to the land of the gods, guarded by fearsome scorpion men, who allowed him to enter the dark tunnel where no human had ever set foot. At the end of the tunnel, he found the dazzling Garden of the Gods, where the bushes were hung with jewels. There, he found a woman who asked Gilgamesh why he looked so sad. "I want to be immortal," Gilgamesh said. "Just enjoy your life," the woman replied. "Eat, drink, dance, love. That's what life is for." But Gilgamesh wasn't convinced. So the woman told him how to cross the ocean and find Ziusudra. But when Gilgamesh finally found him, Ziusudra couldn't help. "Immortality is a gift of the gods," he said. "It is their secret and theirs alone." So Gilgamesh came home empty-handed, but wiser. Now, as he looks at the walls of his city, the city he spent his whole life building, he realizes how much better it is to do good work in the time that he has, rather than spend time trying to become immortal.
Okay, so after the Sumerians, their city-states, they're not really full empire yet, but then the Akkadians come in, and now it's an empire. And they're ruled by the first emperor in history. His name is what? 1, 2, 3? Sargon. All right, Sargon. If you see anybody that graduated here 2 years ago, you can tell them, hey, Sargon? They'll know what it means. Anyhow, okay, polytheism. Poly means many. Theism has to do with God or religion. So polytheism means they're worshiping many gods, okay? So you need to know the difference between monotheism, mono means one, and polytheism, poly means many, okay? So in general, human beings will go from polytheism to monotheism, okay? That's just the way that human history has progressed, all right? So take a look at the Sumerian social order. Do not write all of this down. Just notice what it is, and then we can compare it to other civilizations and see if they value the same thing or have the same order. So the king on top, that makes sense, but then the priests, craftsmen, merchants, okay, farmers, laborers, okay, there you go. Yeah, how do you say her name? Ooh, that's a tough one. Enheduanna? Enheduanna? I went for it. Okay, she's the daughter of Sargon, the first female writer in history, okay? What are the first people in Mesopotamia called? Do you remember? Sumerians, all right? Good job. What was the first empire in Mesopotamia? Akkadians. Good job. What is your social class based on? It's based on your job. Okay, so what natural event affects Sumerian culture the most? Okay, the floods, the rivers. Please know that. Okay, the rivers influence the culture. All right, that's it for today. I'll see you next time.